Good afternoon, everyone. I'll welcome you all to in this very special session of AIUS Spotlight on Glaucoma, the Truth from the Masters. We are very fortunate to have three esteemed speakers. Dr. Harsh Kumar sir, he'll be speaking on the glaucoma in practice, the current trends, followed by Dr. Rajul Parekh. He'll be talking about role of fixed dose combinations in glaucoma management, and Dr. Sachin Dhawarkar will be speaking on practical approach to maximum medical therapy. We'll first start with the presentation by Dr. Harsh Kumar sir. Sir needs no introduction. As we all know, sir is the head of glaucoma services at Center for Sight, Delhi. He was awarded Padma Shri by President of India in 2015. He has more than 70 publications. We'll request sir to please share his thoughts on glaucoma practice. Sir.
Thank you, Manish, for a kind introduction. Everything is clear?
Yes, sir, it is clear.
Okay. So there's a very interesting thing I want to share with you guys. And that is that now for almost 35 years, and I was shocked to realize that I've been working for so long. I have been going to small cities and towns of northern India and taking so many lectures. And yet we keep having streams of patients who are one-eyed, who have never been diagnosed as glaucoma. And I realized that something is wrong. Actually, in GSI also said that maybe our approach is not correct. And therefore I devised another technique, that is, you have to get the practitioners interested in glaucoma. Why should they work? Why do they want to do anything to do with glaucoma at all? They only want to do cataracts. And they says there's such huge numbers, sir. So what is the problem? We'll do cataracts only. Well, the problem is that there almost everybody in your town, in your place, will be doing a cataract. All ophthalmologists are doing a good job. Really, it is so rare now to see a complicated case. I'm truly impressed. Not only that, with the cataracts, there is so much of seasonal variation. So people will say, oh, sir, now there is a Diwali. Oh, sir, my children's exam. Now it is too hot. Now it is too cold. And yes, today only somebody told me, oh, sir, now, it's not a good season because the rains are going to come. In addition, there are charitable camps who are very busy taking off all your cataracts. So in that case, I think there's so many times where your systems are lying vacant. In addition to that, you know what this is? This is the biggest bugbear we are soon going to have. So you have now a femto cataract, and I can promise you that already half the job is being done. Soon somebody will invent two small tubes, and all somebody will do is to just press a button and the entire thing would be done, and inject a liquid lens in that also. You would be no one and totally out of the picture. So that will be very, very scary, but that time may not be far away. So please be careful. Please understand that glaucoma is something that each one of you in your practice must take seriously. And I'll tell you why it is such a win-win situation. You think it's a no-win situation because you are only seeing towards the surgery part, which I agree is extremely difficult and extremely unnerving. But how many patients today are requiring surgery? Barely 1% or 2%. And those two, you can always refer to a good center. Remember, in practice, a good referral will always bring you so many more patients. Even I refer at my level, and they always come back and say, no, sir, you have got the good of us in your heart, so we will come back to you with all our patients. Plus, there are too many collateral benefits. The first fact is almost 1 out of 8 over 40 years of age, the patient has got either glaucoma or is a glaucoma suspect. 1 out of 8. It's a huge number. So I will not talk about millions and this and that, because you see 8 patients walking into your clinic, one of them will be like this, and cataract will get done and gone. But glaucoma patient is for life. So most of them, you have to sit down with them, convince them, talk to them for a long time. And then, every 2 to monthly, they will come for an intraocular pressure check. Every 6 to 9 months, they will come for a visual field check. Finally, they will develop cataracts as well. Not only that, they are not going to come alone. They are either coming with a younger daughter who may require a LASIK, or even a younger granddaughter who may require refraction, or some friend who may actually require a cataract. So think of the collateral benefits. The easiest thing is that we are taught enough. I bet that all of the postgraduates can actually pick up the glaucoma only if they put their minds to it. And most of the times they also know how to treat medically, but you have to be alert. You have to spend some time with the patient. And please remember, the most important thing is to create a visual impression. I can tell you my practice went up 20% when I started showing photographs to the patients. So you must show to them that, all right, this is a normal disc, this is a normal field, and then this is when you are having slight changes, something is going wrong, and we want to catch you very, very early so that you don't convert when your optic nerve is white. So this is things that they can understand. And then you have to explain to them that it is your duty to bring the rest of the relatives to me, because they are going to be suffering from this disease. So this screening is, imagine how many patients or people will bring into your clinic. And it may be prudent initially not to charge their relatives, because they will think otherwise he's trying to make money. On top of everything, it must be clear that you are benefiting the patient and you are benefiting the society. The money will come, don't worry about that. So you may see them for free, but well, some of them will have this thing, something will have another thing, and then they will stick over to your thing. So it is a win-win situation for all three people, the doctor, the patient, and the relatives. And for us also, for the senior doctors, because I hate to see every day I'm operating a one-eyed patient. And that is what I hate to do. So me, Manish, Sachin, Rajul, we all are doing this day in and day out. So then the importance comes that the patient says, oh, this doctor is doing too many tests. You have to explain. After all, everything is hard earned. And today in COVID time, every bit of money has to be spent wisely. So explain each test. Explain when you are showing them the visual fields, you have shown how it progresses. Tell them, without this test, I cannot diagnose glaucoma. Tell them that we have to do repeatedly in order to know whether the medicine I'm giving to you is effective or it is not effective. And how much medication I require to give you is also depend on this test. So once you sit down and explain to them, they will not be averse to spending the money on doing that test. Again, pachymetry. When I go for lectures, a lot of people tell me, sir, we don't have the pachymetry. So all right, you may have to send to somebody to get this corneal thickness. May not do it unless it's a case of normal tension glaucoma, because if it is normal tension glaucoma, it's a very thin cornea, then you know that you have to add some pressures. Or if it's an ocular hypertension, then it is important because you know that what exactly is the role of the thickness over there. Again, so all these things are important, but you have to explain to the patient. Gonioscopy is important because You tell them that if it is an angle closure, your chances of getting into problems. I would not say blindness to the patient, because the moment you say that you can go blind, the patient will completely lose it. I've seen so many patients get totally shattered and their lives are destroyed if you tell them that word. Anyway, many of them are going to go back and read the Google, and that can create a problem. So explain to them that please don't worry, you have glaucoma, there are only early features. I will take care of you. But explain that yes, you have to do these fields, we have to do the corneal thickness. I am doing a gonioscopy because it is important. If you have angle closure, we have to be more alert and we have to do a peripheral iridotomy, and you are going to earn money out of that also. So you have to be careful on that. Fundus photo, they are very, very happy getting done, because you can tell them if you have diabetes, if you have hypertension, if you have anything else, this will also be documented in that photo that I'm taking for you, plus the disc will be documented. And lot of progressions can be first caught on the disc itself. So very early changes, structural changes are some of the earliest changes to come up. So this was one of my patients in which the cornea was thick, the pressure was varying from 20 to 24, OCT was normal, field was normal. And I said, all right, let me just sit on this and observe this patient. And 1 year down the line, you see the patient comes to me, already there are changes. You can see there is a wedge defect and the field is still normal. So then you can explain, you can show all these things to the patient and tell them that you see, I have to do a OCT because the OCT will pick up the changes much, much earlier than anything else. So he understands that every bit of money which is being spent is being spent wisely. And I bet that you can all look at the neuroretinal rim and you can understand that isn't rule is important. Inferior area has to be thickest, followed by superior, followed by nasal, followed by temporal, because that is how the fibers come. Though the rule may not be followed all the time, but by and large, it is very helpful for you to recognize that something is not right if it is not right. So as you can see over here, the inferior area has become thinner as compared to the superior area. And these dead fibers can be seen as a wedge defect, which if enlarged, we know that things are not going in the right direction. Same over here, you can see a normal neuroretinal rim getting thinned out. Again, the moment you see a hemorrhage, you can take a photograph, show it to the patient, and he will realize immediately, yes, they are really, really scared of a hemorrhage. So you must tell them that, please, we have to be more alert, more aggressive for this kind of a situation. As far as the size is concerned, very, very important. So many times I've seen that people are treating only large cups. So you must understand that anything between 1.4 to 2 millimeters is the normal size of the disc. And if there is a large cup, that is likely to be a part of a large disc. So you must measure the size of the disc, and that can be done with the help of a slit lamp, creating a light beam which will fit with the disc size. And if you're using a 90D, multiplied by 1.3, and you get the measurements by the size over there. So then you realize that, okay, now here immediately you will realize that, oh, this disc is very large. This cup is very large. We must treat this patient. Every day I get patients like that. Though the neuroretinal rim is good, though the isn't rule is being properly followed, though the fibers are all good, yet there is an asymmetry between the two eyes. So people will jump up. They will not see what is happening. They will forget, they'll do fields, OCT, which will all be normal. But then you see that the disc is so much larger in the left eye as compared to the right eye. And that is why it is showing you as a large cup. So it's all physiological. So this 12-year-old daughter came to me, a girl came to me with so many tests done and everybody crying, she has got glaucoma, treatment has been started. the first thing you need to do is make the parents sit down. Once the parents sit down, you find, oh my God, he's got a similar kind of a cup. So what am I doing? So be very, very careful. And again, if you have an inferior notch, like in this case, make sure that there is a superior field defect. Show this to the patient that you have a disc which is abnormal, you have a field which is abnormal and fitting into the diagnosis of glaucoma. So that is what always should be done. Again, now this may be absolutely normal, but if you see over here, there is a notch in the superior area. And if you see the visual fields, you'll find that this is represented as a step over here. Again, nerve fiber analysis is an expensive test. From various clinics, from 1,000 to 5,000 people are charging for it. Like I showed you previously, you have to use it judiciously. Classically, you should use it only, let us say, a case of ocular hypertension in which everything is normal, yet you feel that there may be some abnormality developing. Like the case I showed you before, if you do that, you'll immediately pick up that there are early changes and maybe I should start treatment. So like this case with the OCT had shown very early changes, and the moment year passed without treatment, the changes become progressive. So even when fields are normal, sometimes this you are not able to clearly see, this would be very, very evident. Now people say, sir, I don't have this machine. How am I going to do? I cannot do anything in glaucoma. And wait, don't lose hope. Identify 5 hospitals or single setups who will not keep your patient. They will send that back the patients to you, so you can send those patients for perimetry, fundus photo, and pachymetry. And the patient will have a feeling that yes, this man has a good faith in me, so he is sending me because for my good only, and they will definitely come back to you. Another technique which I called actually the Indore model because I learned it from there. 7, 8 ophthalmologists got together, got a common area, pulled in much lesser money by which they could buy all the machines. Otherwise, there was no way they could have done it. And put a common PA over there, and you can go in and do all the things over there. So in this era of corporates, if you want to fight corporates, group practice or a group thing like this could be a wonder thing. So what I wanted to tell you was you must develop a glaucoma screening. Even if you are a single practitioner, make them feel that yes, they have come to a specialist place where people can be caught. So 6 to 10% of walk-ins will be those who will have this. All relatives would be screened. Take time to explain, need for follow-ups. Always use photographs to impress them. Okay, enjoy a steady practice and don't wait only for cataracts. So I hope I've convinced you to put glaucoma as a part of your practice. Now let's move on and see what exactly is happening in the management part. So the people who are going to come after me are going to speak on combination therapy, and Sachin will speak on maximum medical therapy. So I'll just set the ball rolling for you. We know that medical therapy is the cornerstone of management. Yes, like I said, one part is only observation also. But by and large, most of the patients today are controlled on medications. Obviously, what we require from them is good adherence, persistence, because it's like BP. You know, you can't check, you don't know, nothing is wrong happening over there. That is why the importance of those photographs. The moment you show him a one normal photograph and one abnormal photograph, they will never forget. And then their adherence will improve so much more. The thing is that though intraocular pressure is not in the diagnosis of and definition of glaucoma, yet it is the only modifiable factor. So all the patients who have higher intraocular pressure have greater chances of developing glaucoma and getting progressions as well. And it is very, very important for us to identify which of these patients are fast progressors. So if the fields are dropping down rapidly, you have to be very, very alert, increase the medications, or maybe you will even have to go in for surgery in these patients. Younger the patient, more the fast progression, you have to be very alert. So where do we want to keep their intraocular pressures when they first come to us? We have diagnosed glaucoma, we have done their disc evaluation, we saw something was wrong, we did the visual fields, we did a corneal thickness, we did a gonioscopy, we found it was open angle, or if it was angle closure, we did a peripheral iridotomy. Then we did a fundus photograph and a OCT if required. And then we move on to medication. So normally for a patient, there are a number of things given that OSTS go 20% low, normal tension go 30% low. But by and large, what I would say is that if there are early changes, please try and keep the pressure below 20, preferably around 18. If it is a moderate field damage or it's a one-eyed patient, better keep it around 14 to 15. And if it is an advanced field, then have to have a pressure as low as possible, preferably around 10. But this is the primary thing. This is the pressure that we have thought we'll fix up. Then we will repeatedly do visual fields. If it is an ocular hypertension or mild changes only, then we'll do the visual fields after every 6 months to 1 year. If it is an advanced damage, we will do fields maybe every 3-4 months to know whether we are okay or not. Plus, sometimes even that much time is not adequate, so you must do a diurnal control. Means you have put the patient on medication. You have to check whether the target IOP has been reached at all time points or not. So if it has been reached at all time points, then you can sit easy. Otherwise, you have to change your medication. You can't wait for the fields to deteriorate. Actually, if the fields deteriorate, you have already lost the battle because some of the fibers are already dead, which cannot be brought back. So not only will you look at the pressures, you will also look at the variation. So we are trying to keep the variation as low as possible. And now they say less than 3 to 4 millimeter is the one that we'll be looking at. That is why we want to do a diurnal fluctuation initially and then a diurnal control later. So now we are going to start a medicine for our patient. First, you must sit down with the patient, spend 5 minutes, see who the patient is. Can he afford what you are giving? Where does he work? Is it possible to put him the medicines multiple times? All these factors you have to understand when you sit with the patient and talk for 5 minutes. Just talk anything. Indian people are so good, they will talk to you about everything and they will tell you, oh, I've got 3 daughters, they are all unmarried, I have to marry them off, I have no money and this and that. So you know that possibly instead of PG analog, you can start with a beta blocker. Because you know if you give an expensive drug, they will also always neglect themselves and spend the money on children. So please be careful about these small things. So what medicine I want? Something that lowers the pressure maximally, has to be put minimum number of time, preferably does not require a cold chain, which also helps me to blend the diurnal variation. But cost effective and minimum side effects are very, very important, along with effectivity throughout 24 hours and especially in the night, because we know there are a number of medicines which do not act in the night. Now, since we do not know whether he's a fast progressor or not, you will be extra alert if cornea is on the thinner side, less than 500 microns. If the patient has a family history, and people tell me, sir, there is a family history. Arey bhai, family history is not important. Ask them what happened. Bring the records of that family person. Now, when they bring the record, you find it's an ocular hypertension, you are not so worried. But if that record shows you that the patient is already gone blind in one eye, you are very worried because this relative may mimic those things. So if the gonioscopy is on angle closure, you know you have to be extra alert. If the IOPs are on the higher side or larger fluctuation, you are alert. If there's a pigment dispersion, pseudo exfoliation or other systemic diseases, you are extra alert. Like we said, the primary drug would be a PG analog. If the patient is poor, you can give beta blockers. If both cannot be afforded, you can give a combination of dorzolamide and timolol, or you can give a combination of dorzolamide, brinzolamide, which may be as effective as the initial therapy by PG analog or a beta blocker. And always, if the patient is very poor, you may have to fall back on surgery. So what I have seen is people jump. The patient is 30. It is an open angle disease. So don't jump on the patient and start giving Diamox, this, that, and 10 medication. No, it is an open angle glaucoma. He has come to you after so much, but he has been having a disease for a long time. So quietly start one therapy, see how much it is effective. If the effect of one therapy is less than 15 to 20% of loading, then you can first switch that into the same group, so that if one group is not acting, you can go on. Like suppose in the PG analog itself, there are multiple choices and you can change those choices and see which is effective. If they are not working, then you can add on medication. Yes, but if the intraocular pressure is more than 30, if the disc is compromised, then I'll be okay with you starting more than 2 medications at a time, and sometimes even 3. If the pressure is more than 40, no, nothing is getting into the eye because the pressure is so high. So drops you will put will not use. So start estrazolamide over there or a glycerol if they are allergic to sulfas, and be very, very careful there. And again, you can add medications according to what you want. My preference for adding a second drug has shifted from brimonidine to dorzolamide, brinzolamide, simply because brimonidine does not act in the night, and brimonidine has a lot of allergy. Almost 30% of the patient will be allergic to that. And now we are lucky, there are more and more drugs like ROCK inhibitors have also come in. So you can check which one to add. Again, if it is a patient of acute ACG or acute and chronic, be more alert, because ACG blindness is 3 times the OAG blindness. So you have to see them very, very regularly. And the choice, as I've already told you, depends on mechanism of action, efficacy, target IOP to be achieved, preservatives or preservative-free medications, and yes, in India, cost is very important. So see the overall picture, see the safety, see the systemic diseases that the patient is suffering from, and what is the interaction of medications that you are taking. See whether they are going to adhere and what is their quality of life. Invariably, most of the patient would be requiring more than one medication. And by the time they come to me, Manish or Sachin, they will be requiring multiple medications. So the second therapy must be carefully added, and wherever required, please add combinations about which Rajul will be talking in detail. But just to stress the point, we are putting lesser number of drops, we are putting lesser number of times, your cost is better, your exposure to BAK is better, and the chances that the patient will forget the second drop is also less. So combinations are very welcome, not as a first line therapy, but yes, at times if PGR analogs are contraindicated, maybe as a first line therapy as well. So when as a first line therapy, if there is advanced glaucoma, if there's a younger patient requiring aggressive treatment, if there's a higher rate of progression, or the fields are quite defective, in these situations, you have to be very alert. And like I told you, as far as the follow-up is concerned, if the patient is very advanced, please see that the pressures are done every month and he's followed up every 3 to 4 months with visual fields. If it is just an ocular hypertensive or very early changes, don't panic the patient. See them every 3 months for pressures and every 1 yearly for the visual field changes. Please sit with them, talk to them, explain what is glaucoma, explain to them that this is the schedule for follow-up. Please explain to them punctal occlusion, which very few people are telling. Need to report side effect, but the biggest benefit would happen when you tell them that I will take care of you. Don't go to the Google Baba and read all nonsense. So the most important part is healing. Tell them there's nothing, I will take care of it, but you have to promise me that you will come to me regularly. Thank you very much for your kind attention. Over to you, Manish.
Thank you so much, sir. It's always a pleasure listening to you, and your presentations have got 4 decades of experience, as there are so many interesting points you have shared. So as Dr. Harsh sir has to leave for another session, so we are lucky to have a question. This is a question from Dr. Sur that, sir, how do we get courage as a new glaucoma practitioner to surgically treat patient with PL minus or one-eyed patient, knowing that there is no visual benefit? Sir, what is your take on this?
Okay, so that is a very, very good question because let me be frank with you. First of all, you must have to understand your own capabilities. Now, if you have done enough trabeculectomies and you are confident that you will be able to manage it, then in that situation, you must uh, first make a video, sit down with the patient, explain to him each and everything, and tell him to repeat. So you are telling him that I am doing it because if I do not do the surgery, your vision is likely to finish. Yes, when I'm doing the surgery, there is a 1 to 2% chance that the vision may drop suddenly or rarely may go also. But instead of this 2%, would you like to go into a situation where 100% chance I'm telling you that you are going to lose your vision? Get the consent written in patient's hand in their own language. So we must be legally very, very safe. And then explain to them that I am doing everything in good faith. You and please also offer and write it down that if you want a second opinion, please go ahead and take a second opinion. Because nobody would really nearby you, if you are a glaucoma specialist, I don't think anybody nearby you would like to do that patient themselves. So prepare the patient well, explain to him this thing, and while doing the surgery, be very, very careful. Always give pre-operative mannitol. Always put do a good perivalvular block. Always operate on a soft eye. Always put 3 sutures all along so that you can immediately close up the wound after you have done the surgery. And then always, most important thing is that you must pray.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. So before you leave, I'll just, if you allow me one more question.
Yeah.
So this one question which I wanted to ask you, sir, a lot of time we have patients who are already on maximum medication.
Right.
Say you have now reached your maximum medication and now you're seeing a fresh disc hemorrhage has come.
Yeah.
Now you're already on maximum medication. You can't add anything. So will that hemorrhage alone give you an indication to operate, or how will you now handle this? I mean, systemic factors are all taken care of purely from glaucoma's treatment point of view. How will you now?
Manish has really caught me. It's a very good question. And yes, we all face it that way, you know. So the question is that now the next step of operating this very advanced patient is not something that can be taken lightly. And if you are 100% sure that the hemorrhage is not related to the diabetic status or the hypertensive status, and you really cannot add anything more to it, then theoretically, yes, uh, because many a times the changes would already begin and the field and the OCT may show the changes later. So yes, you have to start talking to the patient. He's not going to get ready in a day, nor are you ready in a day to operate. But you put in the patient's mind, yeah, hemorrhage aa raha hai. I'm worried. Things are not well controlled. We are going to do 1 or 2 fields for you within 1 or 2, 3 months. And if I see that there are changes coming, then I think there is no choice for us but to.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Thank you so much, sir. So I think we'll move to the next presentation by Dr. Rajul Parekh.
Thank you,
Sir,
Dr. Manish, and thank you, Rajul. I'm really sorry I have to leave for another.
no, sir. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you. It was really a pleasure listening to you,
All
sir.
of you. Thank you, and bye for now.
Bye, sir. Thank you. So, Dr. Rajul Parekh, as we know,
Thank
is
you,
the
sir.
director of Shriji Eye Clinic and Palak Glaucoma Care Center, and he's ex-consultant LV Prasad Eye Institute, Hyderabad, more than 80 publications. It's really a pleasure to have Dr. Rajul Parekh. Sir, please, you can share your screen.
Okay. Okay, visible?
Yes, sir, visible.
Visible.
So,
Not audible.
thank you, Sachin. So my talk is role of fixed dose combination in glaucoma management. And next 15 to 17 minutes, I have to try to cover the importance of the fixed dose combination. Now, I do not have any financial interest. We know that glaucoma is the second most common blinding disease. Once you remove the cataract, actually is the most common blinding disease, one-way process. The cataract, fortunately, is not one-way process. And in India, if you look the population-based study, more than 90% of the patients are unaware when they are diagnosed about. So glaucoma awareness also is poor, and not even in rural, it is in urban city also the same situation. And there's a huge population of the glaucoma and glaucoma blindness in our country. Now, if you look the impact, then glaucoma causes definitely not only day-to-day problem because of the loss of contrast, the decrease in vision. It causes the problem in day-to-day activity. Not only that, because of that, patient loses the confidence. It also causes the psychological problem. So anxiety, depression is more common in the patient with glaucoma, especially moderate and severe. They have the risk of fractures are more, the risk of the early death, the mortality, the age, when they were compared with the general population, the average lifespan is little less compared to the normal population. So glaucoma is definitely is ocular disease, but it has impact on the various aspects of the body. Now, when we talk about medical management, we know it's a progressive optic neuropathy without a cure. We want to stabilize the function, and vision must outlast the patient. Medical therapy is cornerstone. So when we talk about medical therapy, what I would like the 24 hours pressure control with minimal medication, no long-term trip, minimal side effects, preferably no side effect and user-friendly. So if I can give one bottle, one drop a day, I would be very happy if I can stabilize the disease with only one drop a day. And if you look the algorithm, the first choice usually we start with monotherapy. Prostaglandin and beta blocker usually are the first choice. Then we look for follow-up. We look for the target pressure. If it's achieved, then we just continue that. If it is not achieved or there's side effect, then we shift or we add. And then we go on to add the medication. And in some time, we may have to consider the surgery. And Dr. Harsh Kumar already mentioned all these things. If you look, this is the US data, that 85% of the glaucoma population is on medical medications, and the surgery was only 2%. Now, Indian data would be little different, but still the topical medication would be the maximum percent of patients. Here, the SLT would be less. I don't think it would be 12%, and filtration surgery would be more. But eventually, the topical medication is the main cornerstone of the glaucoma management. And if you look the OAT study, we always like to start with one medication, but OAT study shows that over a period of 5 years, majority of the patient would be 2 or more medication. In fact, OATS was with ocular hypertension, not even glaucoma. And at the end of 5 years, more than 2 medications were in 75% of population. So majority of our patients are on more than 2 molecules. Now, when we give the unfixed combination, what are the problems we face? What are the problem patient face? So one is adherence, one is persistency. Both are different things. So I put the definition. Adherence means degree to which the patient follows the treatment instruction during a finite period of time. So if you ask patient to put twice a day, patient is taking once a day, it's a poor adherence. If you ask him to take at morning 8 a.m., he takes instead of that afternoon. When he feels comfortable, it also is poor adherence. Persistency is the time until which the patient first discontinues the medication. So he has continued for 3 months and then discontinues. That is a poor persistency. So both have little different meaning, and both are important as far as glaucoma because it's a chronic disease. If you look the studies, they found, and this was study done using the compiling the various data, electronic monitoring, prescription record, medical chart review. What they found that the majority of the patients, huge, more than 50%, had poor adherence. In fact, this is not for the glaucoma. This happens for the disease which can cause high mortality also. So in one of the study which I was reading, that they had put the chip which can identify whether patient has taken the insulin or not, and they found that the patient telling that he has taken the medicine versus the actual electronic data, the difference was more than 40%. So poor adherence is poor even in disease which can cause high mortality. The glaucoma, the Indian data, more than 70%, poor adherence, nearly 50% stop taking medication within, so poor persistency, which is across the world. It's not that, of course, in some countries where the medications are given free, covered in insurance, adherence persistence is little better. Now, why is important? Because if you don't take medications, or if you take erratically, it would have the treatment effectiveness would reduce. If the treatment effectiveness is reduced, the eventual outcome in glaucoma is poor because the glaucoma would progress. So, and what are the causes? And there are different studies I'm going to quote, but mainly the huge percent of the patients either talk about the pain, discomfort, difficulty in administering drop, the poor knowledge, unknown belief in glaucoma, difficult medication schedule, that also is nearly 47 after 119. So that also we have to remember. And the other study also, they also found that difficulty in medical schedule and drop administration, because more majority of our glaucoma patients are old. They may have another systemic disease which make them difficult to put the drop. So these are the reasons for the poor adherence in glaucoma management, medical management. And if you look this, the constant is data. What he found that they compared the people who were compliant and poorly adherent, and they found that people who were poorly adherent had high IOP, more disc cupping, more perimetral loss, and which is bound to. It is nothing new I'm talking about, or he found out. This is bound to happen. The important thing is that what are the causes, and when I mentioned that the number of drop patient is to remember. So if you look the data, as the number of drop increases, the adherence reduces. Like on one drop, it's 80%. On 4 drop, it is 50%. So you increase the number of drops, thinking that patient should remain stable. Patients stop putting the drops properly. His adherence goes down, and over a period of time, his disease progresses. You must remember the one of the important reason: more number of drops, the adherence is poor. The other thing, more number of drop causes ocular surface disorders. And if you look the published data, I'm just given one references, that the more number of drops, the more dry eye, the mean OSD score increases, OSDI score. So the symptom and sign of the OSD increases. And that also would eventually lead to the poor adherence and poor persistency with the medications. The other thing, if you have given different drops, multiple bottles, the drug washout. Ideally, there should be at least 5 minutes gap between the 2 drops. I like more, but at least 5-minute drops between the 2 drops instilled. Now what happens? If you look the data, the time between 2 installation was in 12% was less than 1 minute, 24% was less than 5 minutes, and if you look other study, less than 3 minutes, 22%. So huge percentage of the patient puts the second drop immediately, which washed out the first drop. So eventually you're giving more medications, but the less effect. So when you combine, what is the advantage? Of course, it adds additive efficacy. The preservative exposure is less, so the ocular surface disorder issue is decreased. Better tolerable. Losing frequency is better, so better adherence. Washout is less, so more effective. So the fixed combination definitely has a more important role in the glaucoma management. So the single bottle, as I said, there are multiple advantages. Now, what the guidelines like SIGI, EGS, the World Glaucoma Association talks about the fixed combination, and majority said should be considered when patient fails to achieve the individual IOP target with monotherapy. So nowhere so far in my talk I have said to start with combination. No, we don't do that. We start with monotherapy, we add second medication, and then we shift to the fixed combination. It's preferable to two separate instilled agents. So when you are giving two different molecules, then you combine. It's more convenient than individual component. So the rationale is that when you combine, when you giving two molecules, then combine. You don't start with two molecules. So basically, it should be convenient. And yes, so when you give more than 2 bottles, then you combine and reduce the number of bottles. The less the number of drops, less the side effect, better the compliance from the patient side. Now, what are the fixed combination? These are the various combination available and the IOP reduction efficacy. So the Prosta, we have beta blocker CA inhibitor, which was launched only a few years back. The most commonly used is prostaglandin beta blocker. Then we have beta blocker CA inhibitors. We have beta blocker alpha 2 agonist, and we have beta blocker pilocarpine. So these are, and the latest one which is not available in India is netrastudil latanoprost, Roctretan. So these are the combination we have. Of course, prostaglandin beta blocker is the IOP reduction is maximum. Now, so I'm just because of the fixed drop, I thought that I will because I'm talking about the adherence also. So what are the strategies we can have? So one is reduction in number of medication. The second is so fix over unfixed combination, but never start fixed combination when you're seeing first. Start with the one molecule and then go to the, when you add second molecule, shift to the fixed combination. It reduces the exposure. You try to reduce, you give the medication which is neutral pH. So of course you explain the patient. The comfort of the patient is very important. So if the drop is not going to sting, it has a better tolerability. So as I said, the fixed combination, now what happens, advantage with fixed combination, it improves the adherence also. So if you look this study, the unfixed combination was 60%. When you shift to the fixed combination, adherence improves to 80%. So that is the advantage. There are various advantages. Now what are the available? I already mentioned these are available molecules we have. When you decide for the fixed combination, we have multiple different combinations. You look for the efficacy, tolerability, and adherence. So usually in my clinical practice, I start with prostaglandin. Usually I add beta blocker because that is the most commonly available. Then when I add third molecule, I add CA inhibitors. Alpha agonist is more side effect. Otherwise, I have no personal interest. I like both of them. So when I add third molecule, then I usually go and shift the CA inhibitors and beta blocker. So that's why I can have only 3 drops a day. Now, brinzolamide timolol is a new combination, the brand available. It was launched only a few months back. Both have inhibits the aqueous secretion. And I just show few data. So one was compared with the individual molecules, the brinzolamide timolol combination versus isolated brinzolamide, isolated timolol, and they were randomized. And they found that the IOP reduction of combination molecule was significantly better than individual molecule. That is what I expect, and that they found. So it was good. The second they found, they compared with the other available molecule. They found that IOP reduction was similar. Again, that is from the previous data. I know that it should be the same. IOP reduction should be more or less same. But what I was interested whether the side effect, because dorzolamide is little acidic, brinzolamide is little less acidic, the side effect should less, and the study found that it was more tolerated by the patient. The side effects were less. So that is the advantage. This is another study they found. They basically crossover is another very good study design as far as comes to drug efficacy. And again, the same thing they found, that the side effect was significantly less, and majority of the patients, when asked subjectively, preferred the brinzolamide. So to summarize, we know that glaucoma is a leading cause of irreversible blindness. poor adherence has been documented in patient with glaucoma. We have to taking care of adherence is a big headache as far as all the chronic disease is concerned. We have to adapt the strategy. The most important thing is giving the chair time. The more the chair time to the patient is more comfortable talking to the doctors, which actually we would come to know what are the issues related to why patient adherence is poor. First of all, we would also know that adherence is poor. Fixed combination has advantage over unfixed combination, and the drop comfort level also has a role to play in adherence, indirectly but definite role. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Rajul. I think Sir has very nicely and in detail covered all the important points related to fixed combination drugs. We do have some questions. We'll take the questions after Dr. Sachin has finished his presentation. I just had one query for you, Dr. Rajul. Like now, as a glaucoma experts, we are spoiled for options. Now, so many options have come. So like we have brimonidine timolol, brinzolamide timolol, dorzolamide timolol, so many combination drugs. So how you decide which patient to use which type of combination, because now options have increased.
So as I mentioned during the talk, that usually I like to start with prostaglandin. So when I start with prostaglandin, if the patient is not on systemic beta blocker, or if beta blocker is not contraindicated because of any systemic reason, then I usually add beta blocker as my second line. And then when I add, if the patient is comfortable on two molecules pressure control target IOP reach, then I combine and I go with the prostaglandin timolol combination, which I make it once a day in morning. I would, you didn't ask me, but I would like to that prostaglandin timolol I prefer in morning, because various studies have shown that prostaglandin works 24 hours. It is not that it works better in night. Where timolol, we know that the efficacy reduces at the night time. So if you give it the night time combination, then the peak effect would come at the night time when the beta blocker effect is very minimal. So for the same logic, I combine when I shift in the morning. When I go to the third molecule, if your patient is required, then I go for CA inhibitors or alpha-2 agonist. As I said, that both IOP reduction ability is more or less same. I don't have any personal preference over one or two. Alpha-2 agonists do have issue of side effects, the allergic reactions, nearly 15-20%. So, but frankly, I give either of them. But if the patient was given earlier, somebody had given alpha-2 agonist and he had some issue, I would definitely avoid alpha-2 agonist. In that, usually I go for the CA inhibitors. When I go for CA inhibitors and if the IOP reduction is again my target achieved, then I would usually like to combine timolol and CA inhibitors, because then it goes to twice a day, and then prostaglandin once a day. So only 3 drops. Because in isolation, sometime you may have to give 3 drops a day in isolation. So then the number of drops is 4. So that way you can reduce the number of drops and have better adherence. Though there is no fixed formula, because when you give in combination, lots of doctors prescribes alpha-2 agonist CA inhibitors only twice a day, and it may work. So it is not a hard and fast tool, but usually this is my practice in my clinical practice.
Thank you, sir. So we'll move to the third presentation by Dr. Sachin Dharwarkar. Dr. Sachin is a current Director Glaucoma Services at Aditya Jyot Eye Hospital. He's also Director of Samantha Clinic in Andheri. We are really fortunate to have you, Dr. Sachin. We'll request you to share your screen.
Yeah, is it seen now?
Yeah, it's visible. You can go for the full screen view.
Hello? Is the screen seen?
We can see the screen. Go for the full screen.
Okay. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. We can hear you. Yeah, perfectly
okay.
fine.
Yeah. So thank you to the AIOS and Manish for having me here, and Novartis. So today the topic for discussion is practical approach to maximum medical therapy. And this is a very, very important topic, as we came to know that there are a lot of adherence and persistence issues as we increase the number of drops from Dr. Rajul's talk and what Harsh sir also said. it is very, very important for us to choose the right candidates for maximum medical therapy and then make sure that the treatment does not affect their quality of life adversely. So by definition, it is the use of multiple classes, that is more than 3 of medications, usually topical. Oral can be included in exceptional cases, that is maximally tolerated by an individual. This is with an idea to prevent progression, that is the ideal basic outcome, and that is achieved by achieving the target IOP, which is frequently dynamic. This has to be done with minimal side effects, local as well as systemic, with least effect on the quality of life and at an affordable cost, because all these 3 factors will affect the adherence to treatment. Now, actually, if you see, the first 2 and the next 3 lines are exactly opposite to each other, so it's a paradox technically, but it has to be achieved in certain conditions. So basic tenet of clinical practice is first, do no harm. So no medicine is best medicine and least medicine is the best alternative. So until sufficient merit to the contrary, the onus to prove it lies on us. So there are certain situations that demand usage of multiple medications in clinical setting, and we have to take contrarian calls to the basic tenet of clinical practice. We will just see that in form of examples. So why do we need to understand the use of multiple drugs, multiple drugs responsibly? That's because if you see the evidence, that is with the CIGTS and the OATH study, the need for more than 2 drugs was extremely frequent once we ended up at the 2 to 5 year natural history of glaucoma. So we will be ending up using more than 1 drug. So we need to know how to how to use multiple drugs in a responsible manner, ensuring nil progression, at the same time good medication adherence. So now we have certain clinical situations that require maximal medical therapy, and it needs complete patient participation. You will see how. So there are conditions like clinical compulsion, patient factors or patient's wish, physician's judgment, that is risk-benefit ratio vis-a-vis quality of life and achieving target IOP, and conditions where maximum medical therapy principle does not hold good. So we'll see each one of them to understand the case in point. So you see a case of clinical compulsion. Here you have a 35-year-old female patient who's at home. She develops intermittent high IOP on drops. Her medical history is both eyes status post retinal detachment surgery. The right eye, which is the only seeing eye, status post Ahmed glaucoma valve explant due to erosion. She hardly has any healthy conjunctiva. Best corrected visual acuity is 636. Left eye is a prosthetic eye. Central corneal thickness 532. Conjunctiva is scarred with no mobility. There is scleral thinning 360 degrees, as you can see in the photograph, including the limbal area and subluxation of the bag-IOL complex. The disc is pale with a near total cup. Multiple opinions have been taken and no intervention has been advised. This eye is just too sick to be operated. So the current treatment is oral acetazolamide, sustained release once a day, with monthly monitoring of renal function tests, travoprost and timolol fixed dose combination once a day, and brimonidine 0.1% 3 times a day. With the above treatment, the patient is maintaining 10 millimeters of mercury with a relatively stable field, although the field is extremely small and central. But that's all that you can do in such a case. So this is a case where there is a clinical compulsion for maximum medical therapy, and these patients are usually very highly motivated to put all the drops on time. Second is a condition where the patient does not wish for any other therapy and hence maximum medical therapy. So it's a 73-year-old gentleman, retired, case of high myopia with congenital cataract operated, systemically normal. Both eyes status post retinal detachment surgery, both eyes pseudophakia with secondary ACIL done at a later age. His status post trabeculectomy with mitomycin C with a flat bleb on either side. Or rather on the left side, that is a seeing eye. OD vision is finger counting close to face, OS is 6/36. The IOP is 2 millimeters in the right eye, 12 millimeters in the left eye with a corneal thickness of 509 and 660 in the pathological eye, that's the right eye. So the patient, if you can see the photographs here, he had recession of the conjunctiva and scarring here in the infratemporal quadrant. He has a secondary ACIL in place. And he had a superior temporal quadrant, which was quite virgin with good conjunctival mobility for doing a Ahmed glaucoma valve implant. Now, considering his, if you can see the field of vision on the right side, near the central fixation and being the only seeing eye, he was offered Ahmed glaucoma valve surgery around 5 years back. But because he was one-eyed, he chose after due information and due diligence, he chose to undergo maximum medical therapy and wait on it because he was risk averse for doing one more procedure on his eye. So current treatment is travoprost, timolol fixed dose combination once, brinzolamide, brimonidine fixed dose combination twice, and netarsudil at bedtime, which was added recently because we wanted to maintain the targets as low as possible since he has a good 15 years life expectancy with central tubular fields. So this is another case where you have to respect the patient wish and make him a participatory party to the decision making process. Now the third one is physician's judgment, that is the risk benefit ratio vis-a-vis the quality of life and achieving targets. Now you can see this is a 60-year-old male with well controlled, who is now well controlled systemically. He's a business owner and a swimming enthusiast. Now best corrected visual acuity 66N6. You can see the OCT on the right side has diffuse nerve fiber loss, which is significantly advanced. At presentation, his IOP was 34. Now currently 10 on medical therapy. His central corneal thickness is average. Fields, you can see that he is stable over the last 6 years, 5 to 6 years when he's been on treatment. And both eyes of the OCT show advanced loss. Now his quality of life was important to him. He was a swimming enthusiast. He's a business owner. He cannot put too many medications at the same time. He cannot have too much of cosmetic problem because of his business. Now, luckily for us, we could manage to put him on maximum medical therapy for the last 6 years. That is travoprost once a day, timolol, travoprost and timolol combination, and brinzolamide and brimonidine. Surprisingly for us, if you see his photograph, eyes are absolutely white. Don't appear of too much of side effects of brinzolamide, brimonidine combination, which we are oftenly seeing. So we should not be prejudiced beforehand and think about redness. But some of the patients do really well, and if they are well controlled medically, and if you get such a straight line on progression, then I think we are well served doing giving maximum medical therapy to these patients. Now consider the scenario where we would not wait for a maximum medical therapy trial. Now this is a 45-year-old homemaker. She has her homework to do, her children's studies, pretty busy during the day. Best corrected visual acuity of 66N6, and she's a low myope with lattice degeneration. Best IOP on treatment is 17 with a travoprost timolol fixed dose combination and brimonidine 0.1% with normal corneal thickness. She had a history of angle closure, gonioscopy had appositional closure, so she underwent a YAG PI, following which she had a persistent irid to trabecular contact. Then we did an iridoplasty. After that, she has been open, but and because being a myope, we did not add pilocarpine in her case, even though she had some element of plateau iris. Her structure function graphs are indicated here. She had progression, relentless progression on structure as well as function over the period of the last few years. And because of her age, location of scotoma, quality of life, on adding another medication and progression, we had to discuss surgery in this particular case. So this is a case where you wouldn't wait on maxi or try to go to maximum medical therapy, considering all the other factors or all the other risk factors at hand. Now, so how do we embark on maximum medical therapy? Now, this is a Reddy Reckoner slide where you can easily see the drugs. The slide for the efficacy has been shown previously, but what is different is the side effects on the left side. So the left side column will basically decide what is maximum medical therapy in a given individual depending upon his systemic risk profile. So we have around 6 classes of drugs with us, but that does not mean all the 6 will constitute maximum medical therapy in every case. That is the moot point. So prototype for maximum medical therapy question here is, the patient is a 63-year-old male businessman, insulin-dependent diabetic, asthma on Rotahilar with sulfa allergy. Intraocular pressure is 18 on prostaglandin monotherapy. Central corneal thickness is normal, and he has a moderate glaucoma, not threatening fixation. He has severe itching and redness with brimonidine in the last episode when it was introduced. So what options do we have considering what I showed you in the last chart? So in his case, the maximum medical therapy, you can add 2 more drugs, that is cholinergic or ROCK inhibitors. Cholinergics being physiologically opposite to the action of prostaglandin analogs. Your next choice will be the ROCK inhibitors. So as Rocklatan has already given us the additive efficacy of prostaglandin and ROCK inhibitors, in his case, the maximum medical therapy would constitute prostaglandin and ROCK inhibitors, and then surgery if it does not control the progression of glaucoma. Now, setting the target IOP is very well known. We always know that if there is advanced glaucoma, targets would be low. If there is moderate glaucoma, targets will be intermediate. And if there is early glaucoma, targets can be slightly more relaxed. So we have to be very mindful of the age, general status, life expectancy, the treatment naive IOP levels when we make this decision. And this has been a consensus with all the glaucoma societies thus far. As far as the treatment algorithms here of the Asia Pacific Society and European Society is concerned, if you can see here, after the second or third drug, usually the option for surgery or laser is discussed. Obviously, this is for open angle glaucoma. In case there is angle closure glaucoma, the laser will factor in earlier. And as I told you, the other risk factors will definitely tell us when to take off from the concept of maximum medical therapy and think about a surgical intervention. So caveats to maximum medical therapy are, it does not mean use of all drugs available at disposal in all cases. You have to consider mechanisms of action and interactions with other classes, like, for example, PGA and cholinergics. Each subsequent addition of medication has a lesser additive effect than the previous one. Each addition increases the chance of ocular toxicity and non-adherence. Already Dr. Rajul has covered very well. In highly individualized for a particular patient, depending on life expectancy, stage of disease, and comorbidities. Thus, it is not mandatory to apply the rule of MMT in every case. Variability in drug responses, including non-responders, has to be definitely kept in mind. So, the method of introduction or scaling of maximum medical therapy is, first you establish the target IOP. The sequence has been already told to you, unless contraindicated, depending on the IOP lowering ability and dosing frequency top-down. The PGA, beta blockers, carbonic anhydrase, alpha agonists, ROCK inhibitors, and cholinergics in that order, depending upon the indications and the contraindications. Each pair to be combined into fixed dose combinations to reduce the number of drops per day. So effectively, we can come down by almost 3 to 4 drops a day, which is very good for the quality of life of the patient. Additive efficacy to be verified after 2 to 4 weeks, and inadequate or non-response should enforce a switch before an add. Avoid pushing an FDC directly as unless there is an acute elevation of intraocular pressure. So you see that the drug works first individually and then make it into a combination after individual efficacy is established. So as it is today, maximum medical therapy is as follows. In 1990, we had 3 bottles, 3 drugs, and 6 plus drops per day. In 2014, we had 3 bottles, 4 drugs, and 5 to 6 drops per day. In 2017, we have 2 bottles, 4 drugs, and 3 to 4 drops per day. And in 2020, we have 3 bottles, 5 drugs with 4 to 5 drops per day. Now, these have to be continued over a lifetime. So this is very, very important. And you may not get all eyes as you see on the left side. Some eyes may be like the one on the right side also. So decision should be highly individualized. So you have to see the practicality, whether the patient is professional or retiree. You have to see the cost. You have to see the adherence. You have to see the ocular surface condition. So for each individual case, maximum medical therapy will have its own version. So remember one thing, as we increase the number of medications, the role of non-API or non-active pharmaceutical ingredient agents will be important, because they affect the bioavailability, they affect the half-life, they affect the leaching into the bottle polymer, and they affect degradation in storage. So what happens is, when you have innovator molecules who have done extensive trials, they have a wee bit of advantage when it comes to polypharmacy, because the formulations are much more tightly regulated and much more studied as compared to non-innovator molecules. So this is something that we need to consider when we are at the extreme of medications and putting all medications and bombing them on the ocular surface at one time. Excipients are also very important. These are the tightly guarded secrets of the pharma industry. Although the main API can come out, usually excipients and their proportions are not disclosed in open markets. And these can definitely clinch the advantage in cases where polypharmacy is involved, just to minimize the side effects, considering that you have to put the drugs for a lifetime on the ocular surface. So they are important to modulate the side effects and maintain the efficacy of the molecules. So in conclusion, definition of maximum medical therapy is individualized and does not mean all medications for all patients before surgery. You have to be sure of the additive effect when increasing the treatment. Remember the law of diminishing returns when you add more drugs. The quality of life, affordability, and economics will affect the decision. The risk of ocular surface disease multiplies with more drops and preservatives. and the number of drops and the pharmaceutics become important in the setting of maximum medical therapy. So as rightly said in the previous talk, fixed dose combinations work very well by reducing the number of drops and increasing the adherence to treatment. And always remember, it has a multi-dimensional implications on patient's life, and always involve the patient in decision-making process when deciding on maximum medical therapy. Thank you for your patient hearing.
Thank you, Dr. Sachin. I think they are very interesting cases and a lot of practical points, especially the cases were really interesting. So we do have 20 minutes time for discussion. I've received a few questions also. So one point I'd like to ask you, Dr. Sachin, you mentioned about 3 bottles, 5 drops. I think it's an interesting concept that in 2020, we can have maximum medication like 3 bottles and 5 drops. So what is generally the third bottle you'll add? Is a ROCK inhibitor or a cholinergics? What is your preferred option?
That depends on 2 things. Theoretically, if you see, the cholinergics have the prostaglandins have opposing action with the cholinergics. So given a choice, I would not be adding cholinergics first. Besides that, age would also be a consideration, because unless the patient is a patient of angle closure glaucoma, when cholinergics will come into action in my case very early, if the patient is a myope or if the patient will have lattice degeneration, cholinergics will have to be used with a bit of caution. Also, because they cause symptomatic headaches in phakic individuals and also can cause peripheral retinal tears. So that is one thing. But pharmacologically also, they will be opposing action to the PGA. And whereas with the Rocklatan example, as I cited, we have already got evidence of ROCK inhibitors working synergistically with prostaglandins. So the 5th drug, as of today, maybe a netasudil or a ROCK inhibitor as compared to cholinergic in the first instance.
So Dr. Rajul, I think what is your approach in maximum medical therapy? Like when you decide this is enough, now I should go for surgery.
See, in current situation, with COVID pandemic going on, I think surgery sometime, like February, I had to do, patient had come with definite progression. Surgery was not possible. So in that patient, I added netasudil, and the pressure came down by 4 point. Now she's 15, and now she's okay with 5 medication. The 5 medication as a maximum medical treatment, the only issue is the number of drop patient is to put. Then the ROCK inhibitor, the redness, hyperemia, and subcutaneous hemorrhage is very common.
Yes.
And other issue is that recently, just couple of weeks back, Shefali was presenting somewhere, and we look back our data and we found that 3 to 4 patients had a corneal edema. So that is another thing we have to remember. All the patients had corneal pathology. Now, if you look the other studies, the ROCK inhibitor is supposed to improve the corneal endothelial function. But these 4 patients had epithelial, the edema, severe edema. They all had endothelial dysfunction. So, and then I look back the literature and we found the similar case series of 6 patients. And they also reported that all the patients had endothelial dysfunction in some form of corneal pathology, and they all had corneal edema. So I don't know, but that is the side effect we have to remember. So I would still say that 4 medication, 5th in current situation, I don't mind starting 5th medication. If some patients say that I don't want surgery, then we don't have choice. Then we have to add. But in general, I would still stick with the 4 molecule is too much, because then the side effects over a period of years, majority of the patient develop side effect, and once they develop side effect, then the conjunctival, the low grade inflammation, the conjunctiva becomes so friable that doing surgery is not
Yes.
light, but very difficult.
Very, very difficult.
So we have to remember.
Regarding this corneal edema, I'll say a lot of time post penetrating keratoplasty patients, and suppose the patient has got a brimonidine allergy also, our cornea experts don't allow us to use a dorzolamide timolol combination. So
Yes.
do you use a brinzolamide timolol combination in these post penetrating keratoplasty, or you avoid brinzolamide also?
In principle, I avoid CA inhibitor.
You avoid CA inhibitor as a whole.
Principle.
And one more question regarding, like, whenever we start a medicine, to accept that it's a patient is responder, we generally expect around 15 to 20% IOP reduction. But what has been the approach with second drug? So suppose you're adding a second drug, how much millimeter or how much percentage IOP reduction you will get? Then you will probably think that, yeah, the drug is working. Anything like that? Any practical tips?
So see, it's very simple that you use that the IOP at which you are starting second medication is baseline IOP. So and then you if you know that CA inhibitors can reduce 18-20%. So if let's say the pressure is 20, is our time over?
No, my talk time is over just now.
Acha.
No, no, my talk is over. Just now.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
So we have this session till 3:30.
So if it's 20 and if the IOP reduction is 4 millimeter, then is around 16%. So which is adequate. So you cannot get from the second medication, especially the first prostaglandin you started. The second, you cannot get more than 4-5 millimeter. If you get more than that, I would be very happy. But if you get 4-5, I'm quite happy with that. Unless the pressure
Anything more than 2 should be fine. Anything more than 2 millimeters should be fine.
It is variability, so you should go beyond that.
And Dr. Sachi,
more than the intra-session variability of the measurement of IOP.
No, because sometimes you get say 1 millimeter and you're not confused whether it's a measurement variation or is because every time you're adding it, the cost is also adding and side effects are also adding. So you should think what practical. One more thing, you were talking about progression on OCT and visual field. So in your practice, what has been your approach? Do you use both OCT and visual field or mainly visual field? How you decide which patient to use both or which patient to use only visual field for progression?
I collect both on every patient. But if the patient is advanced glaucoma, anything moderate advanced, I think visual field is more important than structural progression, because in advanced glaucoma anyway, you hit the bottom. So chances of the fluctuation of progression is very minimal. So I would rely more on the visual field. In early glaucoma, structure definitely has role to play, but the structural progression I usually use as a soft sign. I would not use structural progression in isolation to change my treatment unless along with the structural progression IOP is not adequate. I mean, I'm not happy with IOP anyway. So structural progression gives me the good reasoning to change the management. But if let's say pressure is well controlled, visual field should stable, and only structure is showing progression, I would not change my treatment. I may call patient early. I may call on a different time to look for the diurnal fluctuation, but I would not change my treatment most of the time.
Sachin, what is your approach? Anything else you want to add to it?
Yeah, so the approach is pretty much similar. For early and moderate, I have both imaging and fields. And as you could see in that example also, pretty exhaustive setup of fields and imaging. And for the advanced glaucomas, as Dr. Rajul has rightly pointed out, because the RNFL reaches the floor, the perimetry with your central 10 degrees and 24 or 30, whatever you're used to doing, that you can continue. The flip side here is, if you honestly look at your own data, then around 30 to 35% of the people are exceptional in doing their fields. The other 35% are around so-so, may have some amount of fluctuation, and some of them are very miserable at doing fields. So the test-retest variability of perimetry is very, very high in some individuals. Then it becomes very difficult for us to make a decision, because then your progression analysis goes for a toss because of the high fluctuation rate. So in those cases, I think the time has now come to give some sort of more importance for imaging in deciding progression, especially in those cases who are vulnerable for doing field tests in the right manner. Because now we have the technology with us. We have very good segmentation and auto-centration algorithms. I have data of around 10.5 years on Spectralis. I am very happy with the test-retest variability. And with that, I feel definitely at around 3 to 5 microns, you can definitely decide, not 3, but at least 5. You can definitely say that some amount, I am not saying that I'll be over-aggressive on that, but now because of the sheer accuracy of the technology that is available and the kind of artifact minimization that we get, time will come very soon where we'll be able to decide convincingly at least for those patients who are not too good on the fields, because that's a very big subset. I mean, 15 to 20% is a huge number. So I will give a due importance, and then in some cases I may, when the risk factors are very high, change treatment based on, like say for the for example, progression is around 7 to 10 microns on global RNFL without any change in the media and my imaging conditions. Definitely, I would consider that as a warning sign.
Keeping all points into consideration. Yeah. So Dr. Rajul, you were talking about compliance factors. So you treat so many glaucoma patients. Any practical tips you like to give to the attendees about how you check compliance in your practice? Because sometimes just asking question may not be enough actually.
So the bottom line is the chair time is very important as far as glaucoma patient is concerned. So if you don't talk to the patient, you don't expect any answer. Getting answer is difficult. So usually I start, in general, and I talk very frankly sometimes with the patient that I also forget taking medication. This is a general phenomena. So once you start accusing, that it's a bad thing, then patient go into the reclusive, and then they will not open up. So you have to ask, in general. Then you said, how many, what are the schedule, how many times, what is your schedule, what time you put, whether how many times you forget in a week, very general thing, and you get a fair idea. Then the second thing I said that one bottle, how many days it lasts. It gives some idea, not because sometimes patient put 3-4 drops in same go, but it gives an idea because patient says that one bottle is lasting more than 45-50 days, then you know that there's a problem. Then in our practice, we make sure that intermittently we ask patient to put the drops and check whether they are putting prop, because even only checking is not in asking, because if they may be putting properly, but the half of the time the drops may not go in the eye only. So those things also you have to check. So and then if the patient doesn't come regularly for the follow-up, I don't tell patient, but you have to assume the worst. That is the adherence also is poor. If he is not bothered about his eye for regular checkup, most of the time it's possible that he's not putting top properly. Though I don't tell the patient that way because it's counterproductive.
Thank you. I think probably I'll have one more question regarding this switching between the prostaglandins. So suppose you started with say a latanoprost and you're not getting good efficacy. Do you switch to other prostaglandins or you switch to a totally different class of medication?
I think there's some databases that shifting can help. There are non-respondent among the subgroup also. So shifting, especially from latanoprost to, I think, different group may help. So I do that. Anyway, that is the base drug we have. So shifting is, and there is the data. So I would say that I would do that.
Each of us in our personal experience has, I think, experienced non-responder rate among prostaglandins. I mean, it's not new. And we have also experienced the variability amongst the class of prostamide versus prostaglandin. So sometimes if you feel that latanoprost does not act and the non-responder rate is pretty high, like 15 to 20%. So in that case, definitely you can try travoprost and bimetoprost in that sequence, considering the side effect profile. And if either of them works, then obviously once a day regimen, as Dr. Rajul said, is the best choice because that will ensure adherence for the long term.
Sure. And one more thing regarding this bag-free medication. Now every company is coming with bag-free. So as a conscious effort, are you intentionally trying to use this bag-free medicine or you are using any specific group of patient we are using it?
I don't use bag. See, so first we have to remember that bag free and preservative free are different issue. So bag free is not preservative free. They use some form of other than Novelia technology, which is the preservative free. The bag free has some preservative. You have to remember that, though maybe better than bag, and the bag is not as bad as portrait. We are using for years and years, and majority of the patient tolerate very well. So if the patient is on one medication, the beat back I don't think would make much difference. In fact, if you look the bimetoprost, when they shifted from 0.03 to 0.01, they actually increased the back concentration for the penetration. So that has a much more back, but the hyperemia is less. So I don't But if the patient has ocular surface disorder, dry eye, I would prefer preservative free in that situation. But in the Indian scenario, not everybody can afford preservative free. I think bag free can be considered as a good alternative.
So what we have to understand is we have been using, as Dr. Rajul rightly pointed out in those 2 points, that we have been using timolol and pilocarpine and dipwerfin for ages with benzalkonium chloride, and nothing has been happening, and suddenly the hyperemia started blossoming. So you have to realize that the molecules itself have a side effect of hyperemia and ocular surface inflammation, which you cannot, and prostaglandins themselves are pro-inflammatory by the very nature of the molecule. So we have to remember that we should not, give too much of importance to back. It's important when it is polypharmacy, too many medicines, maximal medical therapy. Given a choice, in such a case, you would be slightly more careful about minimizing the exposure to severe surface active agents. But it's not the only thing. I mean, you don't have to run around it. Changing your whole paradigm of treatment just because there is back in some molecule.
Thank you. I think this is all the questions we have for this session. So I'll thank all the speakers. I think we had some amazing presentations today about glaucoma management, about fixed combination drug, lot of practical tips about medical management. So thanks to AIUS for the opportunity. Thanks to all the speakers and all the attendees, and thanks to Novartis. So thank you so much. Have a nice day.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Manish, for the wonderful coordination as always.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Bye, Sachin. Bye,
Thank you,
Manish.
Dr. Rajeev.
Bye.